You're listening to IRN, the Inception Radio Network, Chicago, Illinois.
The Extraordinary Phenomenon Investigations Council presents Epic Voyages. Come join us as we enter and experience the great mysteries of the world with tonight's host,
Laurel Tague.
Too much to learn, you say. Cover up the spine, that's your plan, not mine. I'm ready to be told. Secrets to unfold. It's our time to come of age. Time for truth to turn the page. Don't wanna be inside the dark. Live within a question mark. Are they a friend or foe? Tell me now. You need to know. Need to know.
Welcome back, everybody, to Epic Voyages online radio here at Inception Radio Network. And I am hosting tonight Laurel Tague. Let me remind you of our website, Epic Voyagers, VOYAGERS.com, and also our YouTube channel. Go to YouTube and just put in Epic space Voyagers and we'll pop right up. And also let me remind you that our shows are rebroadcast on Friday evenings on Dark Matter Radio Network. I believe that's at 5 p.m. Pacific and 8 p.m. Eastern Time. So we've got a great show lined up for you tonight. I'm going to have a lot of fun with this one. I don't often have the opportunity to interview anyone with information about ETs or paranormal UFO stories or anything. Tonight we welcome to the show Dr. Ardy Clarke. Her website is www.SIXKILLER.com. And she is the author of many children's books and 2 other adult books. One of them was, I believe, where she traveled through the United States talking to indigenous people about their encounters with star people. And the one we're going to be talking about tonight has just been released. The name of it is Sky People and Untold Stories of Alien Encounters in Mesoamerica. She traveled over 20,000 miles throughout, let me see where my list of countries are here. I think it's Belize, Guatemala, Mexico, and was it Honduras? Are you on with me now, Ardy?
Right.
Okay. 20,000 miles over 7 years, plus she had to prepare and write the book, so it was not a small feat. We're going to learn how she did her research. It's actual research. She interviewed individuals who have firsthand accounts, and that's what these 2 books are filled with. The one we're talking about tonight is Sky People. Her previous book, I believe she interviewed folks in North America, is entitled Encounters with Star People, The Untold Stories of American Indians, and that was published in 2012. So let me tell you a little bit about her, and then we're going to jump right in and start talking about some of the information in her book. And it is available, Ardy, it's available on Amazon.com, but do you have a link at your website too?
I'm not sure if I have it up yet,
Okay.
but I do know that Barnes & Noble carries it, and it's in a lot of small bookstores around the country as well.
And who's the publisher?
New Page Books.
New Page Books. Okay, great. Okay, but easy for most of you folks, just go to
And you can also
Amazon.com.
go on their website and order it directly from them.
Okay. I'll tell you a funny story, Ardy. I happened to be at Barnes & Noble up here in Buffalo, New York last week looking for my annual wolf calendars. And I stumbled over to the New Age section where they have all the books that I'm interested in. And lo and behold, there your book was, 2 copies of it on the
Great.
shelf. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that Barnes & Noble's carrying it.
Yeah. So I guess they'd be carrying it online as well. So you could get it from that source as well as Amazon.
Right.
So let me share with everybody a little bit about your background, which is pretty impressive. She's currently a Professor Emeritus at Montana State University. Beautiful country. She's devoted her life and career to working with indigenous populations. And in fact, she has been adopted by enrolled tribal members and actually given traditional names by 3 of the Northern Plains spiritual leaders. The Blackfeet named her Woman with Great Knowledge. The Cheyenne, the Northern Cheyenne, named her Walks All Woman. And the Lakota Sioux named her the Woman Who Helps People. She has degrees in English, history, psychology, and educational leadership. She's a licensed therapist. She has taught English in high school. She's been a counselor, school administrator, and also an administrator and professor at university level. As I said earlier, she's written several children's books. And Sisters in the Blood is her first book. Encounters with Star People was the second. And this one tonight we're going to talk about is Sky People. So, Ardy, a big welcome from Epic Voyages Radio. How are you doing out there in Montana tonight?
Well, warming up a little bit. It's been well below 0 for the last several days, and now we got it's only 12 degrees, so we're doing fine out here.
That's pretty sad when you have to say it's warming up when it's 12 degrees.
I know, but that's the way it is in Montana. It takes hardy people to live out here.
Well, and you have quite a bit of wind, don't you? So that means the wind chills must have been pretty impressive.
20, 30 below. But you know, this has been, although it's considered a frigid, cold wave that's coming through. About 3 weeks ago, it was down to 26 below. So we don't think this is too bad.
Golly, that is cold. Well, I'm not far behind you. We're at 4 degrees over here in western New York right now, and the winds are in the 40 to 50 mile an hour range, so we're down around minus 20 with the wind chill, but I'm not outside, so I don't really care. Now, before we get started on your book, I have to tell everybody something. She is the loving parent of 2 pets. Tell us about your pets.
Oh, I have a Lhasa. Also, she's my prairie rose. She's my baby. And then I have a rescued cat, a Maine Coon, that I picked up on a reservation in Wyoming, and I call her Rez Perez.
Oh my goodness, they're pretty large, aren't they?
Yeah. Well, this one was starving when I found her, and I just picked her up and took her home. She kept running in this quick stop on the reservation, and about the 3rd time she entered the door, as soon as the door would open, she entered the door. I asked the storekeeper, I said, "Who owns that cat?" And he says, "You, if you want her." And so I just took her home with me. So she's been 14 years with me now, and is still fat and sassy.
How sweet. We've in the chat room tonight, I've been going back and forth with some of our regular listeners, and there was a long period where we were talking about nothing but our pets. So you're in good company with our listeners here tonight.
Oh, yes, we love our pets.
Well, this most recent book of yours, as I was saying, it took at least 7 years of traveling. You actually went to these 4 countries, and you went by yourself. You arranged ahead of time for drivers and translators, and of course for your lodging and all of that. But that's quite an adventure for one lady to go down into those parts of Central America alone just to collect stories from indigenous people. I'm going to ask you in a minute about how you conducted your research, what's your methodology, but right now I want to ask you, what on earth led you to pursue such an intensive study?
Well, it was kind of a lifelong dream. I had, when I was in high school, a teacher handed me a book called Incidents of Travel in the Chiapas and the Yucatan, and by John L. Stevens and Frederick Catherwood. And it was a story of two men who had gone down there. Catherwood was an English architect, and he had traveled throughout the Middle East, recording the architecture there, drawing and doing some of the most fantastic drawings of the ancient civilizations there. And then John L. Stevens was an American entrepreneur, got himself appointed as an ambassador to that part of the country, and they had heard of these stories of these ancient cities in the jungle, but no one had really any proof that they existed. And Stevens actually is called the father of American archaeology. So the two of them set out in 1839 and went down. They landed in Belize City, which today is actually Belize, but at that time it was called British Honduras. And they made a trek across Central America through. Actually, they didn't look at any of the sites in Belize, but they went to Guatemala. They landed in what is now Belize, but they traveled through Guatemala, Honduras, and Mexico in search of these ancient cities. And they had some idea of where some of them were, and then along the way they would be led by the native Maya to different sites. So in all, they visited like 49 sites, or 47, I think it was. And then I've actually visited 89 sites during my 7 years. And so, over 40 of them were sites that they never saw. But like Stevens and Catherwood, I would hear about something, and I would head off in that direction, even if it was not on my schedule. When I read their book in high school, I told my teacher, I said, one day I'm gonna follow in their footsteps. Well, it took me a lot of years before I made the decision, but when I retired at MSU, I decided that this was a time for me to take this trip and to fulfill that promise I'd made to myself when I was a teenager. And at the time, I had some friends in Belize, and so I contacted them and I asked them, do you have any idea who might be good guides for me and drivers for me? Because I knew that a woman alone shouldn't be out there driving through the jungles, and many times I was stopped by the local police. We were stopped by the federales. We were searched. Never once did I feel threatened. There was even one time where we were stopped by hooded federal police.
Good grief!
And I mean, they were wearing hoods and protect themselves from local people knowing who they were. And of course, they were searching for drugs. And then the military would stop you and search your vehicles, but never once did I really feel threatened by any of them. All the experiences were positive. People were extremely polite and even apologetic that they had to do this. And I never felt threatened by it because I felt like whenever it happened that they were doing their job and they were protecting the highways that I was traveling on. So I don't know that I think it might have changed some since I completed my research 4 years ago, but still, still go to Mexico, at least to Mexico, and don't feel threatened.
Well, from reading your book, you apparently made at least dozens, if not hundreds, of friends while you were there.
That's true, and so I even have godchildren down there, and people, it's been a really good experience for me, and I can't say enough about the friendship and the welcome that I felt from the Maya people, and from the drivers and the interpreters and the people I met along the way who helped me, because I could never have done this without the help of these wonderful drivers and interpreters who assisted me. And what I was looking for when I started out, I wanted to find drivers that, first of all, could not only speak English very well, but I needed drivers who could speak the native dialects. And I was also interested, if I could find them, drivers who were interested in UFOs. And so that's how I started out my weeding process. First of all, they had to be able to speak English well, and then they needed to be able to speak a native dialect of the Maya language of the region. And then I wanted them to be able to if they were interested in UFOs, that was just a plus. So that helped me tremendously.
Since you brought up languages, one of my questions a little further down was going to be, how challenging was that aspect of your research? Tell everybody how many different dialects and languages that you actually had to work through with these interviews.
Well, there are about 16, cool. but the I had a couple of drivers who could speak 3 or 4 of the different Maya dialects, and they are quite different, which kind of surprised me, because among the Lakota here in Montana and South Dakota, North Dakota, we have the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota dialects, but they're very similar. So if you speak one language, you can generally understand and speak to, say if you're Lakota, you can speak to a Nakota speaker or to a Dakota speaker. But down in that part of the world, the dialects are considerably different. So that was something that we had to be very careful about, making sure that the drivers and guides and interpreters could speak those languages.
Yeah, and I think that's an example of your careful planning ahead of time, because you don't, as I'm a researcher too, not in the same line that you're in. I work more with numbers than people, but you don't go into someone's house, and I use that not literally house, but you don't go into someone's area or their venue or their whatever you want to call it, their house, and expect for them to translate over to make it easier for you. You need to speak to them and make them most comfortable. So I think that
many of them could speak English, which is particularly in Mexico. And I ran onto a couple of people in and of course Belize is an English-speaking country. So in Belize, I had no difficulty at all. But then whenever you get to into Guatemala and Honduras is where you start running on to the different Maya dialects. But, like in Honduras, most of the people spoke Spanish. In Guatemala, there were many, many dialects there. And then in Mexico, there are all kinds of dialects. And, you're talking about, there's still 15 million Maya. The Maya haven't disappeared. I mean, the Maya are alive and functioning very well in the jungles. And a lot of people think, well, the Maya were exterminated by the Spaniards. But that's not the case at all, because the Maya actually did not war that much with the Spaniards. They simply melted into the jungle and stayed away from them.
I'm glad that you brought that up, because that was my very next question, and we're having quite a discussion in the chat room right now. I think it's commonly thought, or at least it's a popular interpretation, and we've seen it, I've seen it written in articles and other places and on websites, that the Maya disappeared much in the same way that the Anasazi disappeared from southern Colorado and the Chaco Canyon area. So in answering that question for me, I'd like to ask you, could you somehow differentiate also between the Aztec and the Maya?
Well, one of the things that I encountered was I met this elder who talked to me about, of course, the Spaniards. He called them the invaders, and he said that when the invaders came to our world, he said the Aztecs thought they were gods. Mm-hmm. And later they discovered they weren't, and so they warred with them, and of course they lost. He said because to the Aztecs they had advanced technology, but to us, the Spaniards didn't come from an advanced civilization. We came from an advanced civilization. We were the ones, we knew advanced civilizations, and the Spaniards were not one of them. We knew they were not gods. And so I felt that was an extremely interesting insight, that because that's true. What happened to the Maya is they simply walked away. I mean, they went into the jungles and they survived. And when you're talking about 15 million people still who are Maya and who are full-blood Maya, mm-hmm. and then you have another, probably 3 or 4 times that many who are mixed, mm-hmm. Spanish and Maya, mm-hmm. and then it's kind of interesting in Mexico because many of the people I talk to, John, they don't even pay attention to the government. They live in their own world, and you ask them down on the Yucatan Peninsula. I was in one site where my guide said to me, he says, "We better get out of here because all the Mexicans are coming." And I said, "What do you mean all the Mexicans are coming? Aren't you Mexican?" And he said, "Oh, no, I'm Yucatecan," he says.
That's interesting.
And that's, the caste war and all that, where the Maya actually fought the government for the Yucatan. And the government has kind of left that part of Mexico alone. And so you go into villages there where there is law that is established by the native villagers that the government doesn't even send policemen into those villages. So if you go in there and you violate a custom, you're on your own.
Mm-hmm. It's like going onto an Indian reservation in the U.S.
Pardon?
Is it like going into an Indian reservation on the U.S. where they have their own?
You still have the FBI on Indian reservations.
Okay.
There they have no authority whatsoever.
Okay.
And so it's quite different. And there are people who've gotten into some very serious trouble. Some people have died because of things that have happened, and just not recognizing the law of those villages and not keeping with the protocols that are set out. You're warned about them, mm-hmm. but about not taking photographs or not doing this in a church, and people have violated it just to see what they can get away with, and have gotten themselves into terrible, terrible, terrible situations.
Wow. So it works really well for the locals.
It does, and they are a closed community, and what's so interesting to me is they depend on those tourist dollars so much that they allow the tourists in, but on the other hand, they are somewhat resentful that they have to use that as their cash, their cash resource, because they really don't want anything to do with the outsiders.
Well, you and I were talking earlier, and you were describing for me that they pretty much have their own, they grow their own food. They are not, you can say that they don't have access to, or you can say that they're independent of, that's another way to look at it, of utility systems and electricity. And they pretty much are I don't know that I'd call it survivalists, but they sustain themselves on the land,
They
right?
do. They do, absolutely. Everyone has their own little garden, and generally they just go out in the jungle and they clear an area, and it's a kind of a slash and burn agriculture. They plant their corn, and of course they can grow it year-round there in the jungle, and the jungle replenishes itself immediately, so they move to another location, and their little cornfields aren't very big. And they grow peppers, and in their backyards you'll see pigs, you'll see chickens, and they have every fruit tree you can imagine. So they have this constant source of, they grow turkeys. So, they raise not grow them, they raise them.
Sure.
But, they have this independence. And I've always said, it seems to me like that if the world go to hell in a handbasket, the Maya will survive because they know how to survive. And, their houses are either made of cinder block or they're made of sticks that they get from the forest. And they're just sticks that are stood up, the same traditional houses that they used to live in. The floors are the earth, and they generally have one for cooking, one for sleeping, and they sleep in hammocks, so they just have their hammocks from end to end. They have their prayer areas. The traditional people have their prayer areas, and they still have their healers, and they still many. I was not in a traditional community, or I should say a village, that did not have a traditional healer or a priest that they looked to for guidance. So even though Christianity has made, if you ask any, the majority of them are Catholics, and they all go to the Catholic Church. But there's always that extra thing that goes on behind, when they're as a community together, where they still practice their native religions.
So I think this is a good time for me to remind everybody who may be joining us a little late that you're listening to Epic Voyages Radio tonight on Inception Radio Network, and we are talking with Dr. Ardy Clarke, who spent over 7 years on this latest book, traveling through Belize, Honduras, Mexico, and darn it, I don't know why I can't remember all four of them at one time. What was the fourth one? Guatemala. Collecting firsthand accounts of one-on-one encounters with something that could only be called an encounter with a star person or someone from out there. So I just want to clarify one thing. So if we see any kind of articles or headlines that say the Maya starved because they cut all the trees down in the forest and there was nothing left and they had to either go somewhere else and they disappeared, that's just inaccurate. They literally just walked into the jungle and said, I don't want any part of this. I'm just going to go back in where they don't want to come and they'll never bother me.
Well, I think we're, a couple of things happened. I think that the ancient cities were abandoned long before Cortez ever came there. At least the majority of them had been abandoned because I don't think some of the cities were still operating, but the majority of them, and it looks like the new scientific research is coming out and saying a 100-year drought is what caused them to leave their cities, to abandon their cities.
Because the city couldn't support that number of that density of people, so it made more sense for them to go back to the land and fend for themselves.
And, and when you get a population that's growing, I mean, some of those cities housed 100,000 people. Just to imagine what it would take to grow food and those kind of, just to sustain us a city that large and when you have a 100-year drought. But there's new research indicating that that's what happened to the Maya, that they abandoned their cities and went into into the jungle, probably more like family groups went in and helped each other and survived. And I think that's probably true.
Now, I'm familiar with the Anasazi up in the Chaco Canyon area, and that's the current thinking, I believe, that somewhere around somewhere between 950 and 1100 AD, they had an extended multiple decade drought, and there was just no way to work around it. If there's no water, there's nothing you can do about it, and that's why they left. So is this about the same time period you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
About that time period. I want, Laura, I don't know if you realize it, but you're fading in and out occasionally.
Oh, am I? No, I didn't realize that.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm not sure what that problem is, but I'll hear part of your sentence, and so if I don't respond right away, I'm trying to think of what you might be asking me.
Okay, well, I'll try and speak more slowly. Unfortunately, as a Texan who moved up to western New York, I've gotten bit by a little bit of the bug of that New York speech pattern, and I talk a little too fast.
Pattern. It's actually, the sound just goes silent.
Okay, all right. Chat room, are you guys having any kind of trouble with my audio or Ardy's audio, either one? And Joe, our producer, how do I sound to you? If we've got a problem, somebody let us know so maybe we can take a break and see if we can correct it. I have a question from the chat room for you, which is really interesting. And I don't remember seeing that you talked much about pictographs, anything like that on your travels, but did you take any kind of photos of artifacts or pictographs that might indicate something like an encounter with ETs or star people?
Well, if you go to some of the sites, you'll see Venus is something that you find regularly throughout depictions of Venus. The Maya didn't do pictographs, or they did. They had their own written language. So they, and it was a character kind of language that they would record everything on these huge stelae, or on their buildings, or on their stair steps, wherever. So there was a very sophisticated writing system that they had developed, and they kept everything recorded, things of significance. But Venus played a major role. In fact, I was in Guatemala, and there's a city there that was ruled by the Sky Dynasty, and according to the stories about the city, is that the man who built it, who was the first of the Sky Dynasty, that he had, although he was human in appearance, he had these extraordinary skills that he could do all these amazing things in order to get this city built, because it's up on a cliff, and you wonder how in the world it ever got built. And as in the Maya, as in some of the Native American tribal beliefs, if you name a child using the word sky, say if your child is Mary Sky, Sky means that this child will be the go-between between the earth and the sky gods, or the star people. And so that the Sky Dynasty ruled this city for centuries. And the leader, the one who built the city, there's a story about him. And my guide was showing me, on this petroglyph of the Venus, and it said he had such a strong connection with Venus that the day he died, Venus faded in the skies till it was barely visible.
Wow.
And it remained that way for several days, and then it became light again. And so that's a story that is told, in that part of the country about this leader, and they were all named different lightning sky, and it was just an amazing story of the sky people that ruled this city. And when you go there and you see these stelae that are there, and some of them weigh 60 tons, you wonder, and the quarry is on another mountainside, and there's a ravine in between them that is big as the Grand Canyon. You think, how in the world did they get those from one place to another?
Well, I know. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's it.
Well, what you're reminding me of, I keep up with some of the research that they're conducting down in South America with the elongated skulls and the artifacts and Pumapunku. And one of the things that they are now hypothesizing, at least down in the South American area, with these enormous blocks, I mean, monolithic, huge, gigantic blocks, that maybe they use something like sonic energy or something to move them, which is possible. Just because we haven't rediscovered how to do some of these things doesn't mean that they didn't know how. And it wouldn't necessarily mean that someone in a spaceship with a tractor beam is the one that moved it. It could just be a technology that we don't know about yet. So
well, and I think, I was talking to one of the elders who told me, he said, if you just think of a world where a catastrophe happened, because he believed that that's what drove the Maya out of their cities, that some great catastrophe had happened, that his people fled into the jungle and into small family co-ops and different things in order to survive. He said, just think if something major would happen to America. And he said, if that were to happen, and 3,000 years from now, archaeologists go through and they see your Statue of Liberty, and they dig her up and they say, oh, she was the goddess of flame.
Yeah, right.
He said, that's what's going on here. And he said that people are making interpretations of what happened and what's going on. And he says, any society that goes through a catastrophe of that kind of proportion, he said, will forget about their history, forget about where they came from, forget about who they are. They will be bent on survival. And that's what they'll be teaching their children. And, it was, that's quite a revelation, because that's exactly true. We would be dealing with survival and not care about all those other things.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. I remember my little anecdote that's similar to the one that you just told is, what if one day, 10,000 years from now, they discover a one of those old-fashioned footed bathtubs, and there's an umbrella lying in it, and some archaeologists at that point will try and figure out how they got that thing to float in water using the umbrella as a sail. So
it's probably true.
Yeah, yes. Right.
Well, and I think that, we assume, living in this contemporary age, that life is just going to progress and progress and progress. But that's not necessarily true. Look at all the civilizations that have fallen in history, in the history of the earth, and it could very well be that down the road we're on that agenda, that we've outlived our time, and that we'll be one of those, and that another generation will come along that has forgotten all about what the United States of America was about.
I don't remember, I've read your book over the last week and a half, but I don't remember if you said anything about seeing any kind of writing, or if they have any writing left from the Maya, or did they even have a written language? Could you say something about that?
They did have a written language, and it was the kind that they were kind of like caricatures of. It was a very defined language, but they were pictures. But they were not like a pictograph or something that that was drawn on cave walls. It was actually an alphabet kind of thing, and the words and the way they were placed, the letters or whatever, when the way they were placed were symbolic and meant certain things.
Okay.
So, and it wasn't. There was no Rosetta Stone, so basically, what happened to the Maya language? I think back in the 60s, a Russian a linguist was able to translate and figure out what each one of the characters meant. And so now we're able to translate, at least we think we're translating, what they're finding on these great monuments.
Very interesting. So are you saying that all of their writing from back, say, 1,000 years ago was not destroyed by the priests, by the invading Spaniards and all of that?
Well, the priests destroyed, all the codices because the Maya wrote books, and a priest by the name of Landa, he was came there and pretty much exercised, he destroyed all the artifacts, all the all the codices, and only 3 of them managed to escape, and they're all one's in private hands and one's out in Paris. I was able to get to the one in Paris and see it. It's locked up, but I was able to get a letter from the university and through my guide in Paris was able to get to see the codices, the Mayan codices in Paris. But there are 3 of them, and none of them today are in possession of Mexico, which is unfortunate, but only 3 survived. And Bishop Landa just literally held an inquisition in Mexico. He killed the priest and the spiritual leaders who would not conform to Christianity, and he burned everything. And I met an elder who told me that his grandfather had said that he had been told as a boy that that the crying and the wailing that went on as he burned everything was just terrible. The people knew what they were losing. I mean, it was their entire history was going up in flames by this. And then the bishop was recalled and reprimanded for what he did, but then the Catholic Church turned around and sent him back again and named him bishop. And he felt guilty and started trying to write down some of the things that about the culture. But again, it was from his perspective, and a lot of people just take it with a grain of salt.
Well, now that's a very good lead-in for my. I think this is about the last question that I have for you before we start actually talking about examples from your book. There's nobody out there wants to listen to either you or me talk about research methodology. I guarantee you, but
right.
I do more of quantitative research, and you were doing qualitative or sociological research. Can you explain to everybody the difference between the 2 types of research?
There's 2 perspectives of qualitative research. There's the emic and the etic. And the etic perspective is an outsider's perspective. And if you are outsider to a community, you interpret the experiences that you observe from your perspective, so that the early recordings of the roles of American Indian women, for example, that recorded basically by white men, said that women were the beasts of burden in the Indian society, that the men didn't do anything and the women did all the work. because they came from a different culture, they didn't recognize that within Indian societies that labor was equally divided. The women were totally responsible for the home. So they built the fires, they cooked the meals, they set up the teepees, they did whatever was related to the home. The male, on the other hand, was the hunter and the spiritual leader of the family. And so that was his responsibility. The parents were, in many tribes, were not responsible for disciplining children. Only the aunts and the uncles would do that because they wanted the parents always to be in a loving relationship with their children, where the aunts and uncles were the teachers and the disciplinarians in terms of being strict and punishing. So when a white man is looking at this society, he's saying the women do all the work and the men don't do anything. You know, and the parents, you know, they don't care. They just let their kids run wild. Because that is coming from the way they believe, their perspective. But there's also an emic perspective, and that perspective is referred to where it's an insider's point of view. And it allows for a different perspective. An emic researcher avoids judgments about their observations and interviews, and they allow for acceptance of behaviors and information, and report information as it is observed and obtained in as objective a measure as they can. And so that's why in my books people are always asking me, well, what's your opinion of this? Well, I try not to give an opinion simply because I want the interviewee to give his opinion or her opinion. I don't want to move the conversation in the direction that I want it to go. I don't want to be pro-UFO or anti-UFO. Sure, I have my beliefs, but I try not to put that in my book. I'll try to let the people I'm interviewing speak for themselves without being judgmental, and report what I found. And for me, that's the truest sense of research, when you let the story of the people speak for themselves. And so that's what I try to do. And hopefully I've been successful at it.
I know in psychological and psychiatric therapy, Carl Rogers, I think, coined this term directive and non-directive therapeutic questioning. And what you're describing is very non-directive. Give listeners an example of the kinds of questions that you asked, and so that you could strictly avoid pushing them in one direction or another with their answer.
Well, in most cases, I just start out by saying to them, I understand that, you know, you've had an encounter or you've had an experience, and, you know, would you be willing to share it with me? And so then what I do is I allow them to begin talking. And if I want clarification, I ask specifically about, you know, a situation. Can you tell me more about that? Can you describe the aircraft that you saw? Or something where they don't give a lot of details or information, but try not to ask them questions, well, like, do you believe in UFOs? Or, you know, that kind of questions. I try to let the story flow and let the people talk and let them tell me what they saw, what they experienced. And a lot of times people tell me how they felt about it, you know. I mean, I had stories of healing from you know, people from the sky. I had stories of abduction where people were extremely frightened. I had stories that were colored with, you know, probably Christianity, where the aliens were either devils, or they gave some prediction that, you know, the world was in trouble, and that kind of thing that you frequently hear in UFO literature, which was not something I heard from American Indians. As a rule, I think I had one person that told me that. But as a rule, you don't, I try to just guide the conversation so that I get as many details. And I've had a lot of people say, well, why didn't you ask this, or why didn't you do that? I try to stay within that limits of the emic viewpoint and the emic researcher, and not, and of course, some of the writers of USO literature say, well, you got to have proof. Well, I'm not an orthodox scientist. I'm a social scientist, and I don't need proof. As far as I'm concerned, I'm collecting the stories of people who have had encounters. And I've had, on occasion, people take me out and show me burn circles in the earth, or, different kinds of things like that. But I don't need proof. Their word to me is proof enough that these events occurred. And they have no reason to lie to me. They have no reason to make up stories. And some of them are very concerned about their reputations. They don't want people to know about it. And I found that throughout Native America, that, people just don't come forward because, first of all, they don't want a bunch of researchers running all over the reservation, and secondly, they don't want to be pointed out as somebody who had an encounter with an alien and be teased or whatever, that comes along with that. I had two police officers on a reservation say, we're called the Little Green Man Patrol. We regret ever opening our mouth about what happened to us, because if we'd have kept quiet, nobody would have ever known the difference. And yet, as long as we live, we'll be called the Little Green Man Patrol, because they sighted and encountered a UFO with aliens and reported it. And it's just a teasing that goes on, but I know that it gets kind of old after a while.
Especially if you're a policeman, I imagine it gets pretty old. How funny. I hate to get into a lot. I've got so many great questions here for you that are directly relate to what you've written about in the book. So before I get into those, let me just ask you, this is not in the order I would have asked it, but did you personally have any kind of unusual encounters of your very own? Did you see anything? Did you speak to anyone that you felt, I'm not sure this guy is real? Did you have anything unusual?
When I was in Honduras, and I had been taken to Honduras by my driver in Belize and dropped off, and I had no intention of going any place except Copan, which is where Stevens and Catherwood had gone. And so my goal was to spend a week, 10 days in Copan, and then I had hired a driver to take me into Guatemala. And he was from Honduras, but he lived in Guatemala. And so I had made that arrangements, and he was a college educated. He was a teacher, and he did guides and was a driver for people when he was not teaching school to earn extra money, because he had some kids in college. And so I was in Copan basically by myself. And after probably 3 or 4 days there, I had a woman approach me, and she said to me, "You're indigenous, aren't you?" Which means you're indigenous. And I said, "Yes, USA, indigenous." And she says, if you go into Copan at night," she says, and she's talking about the ruins, because Copan Ruinous is actually the name of the town, and Copan is the name of the site. I don't know, it should be the opposite, I would think. But anyway, she says, if you go into the site at night, sometimes the elders come. And I said, well, who are the elders? And she said, well, the elders, the people from the stars. And she said, our priest said you were coming. And I said, you mean the Catholic priest? And she says, no. She says, our priest in the village, which meaning their traditional priest, said that a woman would come from El Norte, and she would be a kind woman, and she said, you are kind, and you would be a generous woman, and she said, you're very generous to the people here. And she said, they said that when you come, that we are to take you into the site at night, and if the ancestors come, that means that we're going to have prosperity again. Now, this was about the time of the collapse of the economy, around 2008, 2009, when I was down there, and she says, so we know you're that woman. And I said, I don't think I'm that woman. I said, I'm just a retired teacher. I'm a teacher. I'm not, from this prophecy. And she said, oh, we think you are. Mm-hmm. And she says, my brother will come for you tonight and take you into the site. And I thought, well, how much money is this going to cost me? And she says, oh, no, there's no money. And I felt really embarrassed that I'd even ask, and so at midnight he came, and he had his lights to get into, to guide me in, and we walked and went through this jungle cave or, jungle place that he had took me into the site, and we climbed up this pyramid, and we were sitting there, and he says, now we wait. Well, nothing happened. And then all of a sudden, all of these balls of light appeared, and they were frolicking in the courtyard below us. And I sat there, and I looked at my companion, and I looked at these lights, and they were just balls of light. And all of a sudden, one broke away from the rest, came right in front of me, and the others lined up behind him. And my guide looked at me and said, you're one of us.
Wow. Ardy, I hate to do this to you in the middle of this story, but maybe this is going to be a cliffhanger for everybody, and they'll stick with us over the break. My producer, Joe, is telling us we got a break right now for about 2 minutes or so. So can you hang on to that, and I'll help you remember right where you were?
Okay, I can do that.
Okay, and this is actually written in her book, so it's something you can read about there, too. So let's take a break talking with Dr. Ardy Clarke here on Epic Voyages Radio about her book, Sky People. We'll be right.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin. Don't have a computer? Is your internet connection down? Don't worry. Use your trusty cell phone or landline and call into our listen line at 401-283-6700 to listen to the Inception Radio Network 24/7. Again, that call-in number is 401-283-6700. For the Inception Radio Network, I am MJ.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best.
Hello, IRN listeners. This is MJ saying hello and sharing an awesome secret I discovered. It's called DreamNuage.com. Fresh, raw, organic ingredients are used to create all their products. They are made in very small batches to ensure quality and freshness. Handmade in the USA, each product is created with care and with the finest organic ingredients. There are no preservatives, dyes, or chemicals in any product. Stop by Dream Nuage and relax. That's DreamNuage.com. Simple, raw, organic.
Hello, I'm Pat Usford, inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages every Monday evening at 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com.
EPIC is Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council, the forum for scholars, experts, and those fascinated by and involved in the study of ancient civilizations, conspiracies, cryptozoology, ETs, and UFOs, fringe science, the paranormal, and all manner of extraordinary phenomena. Please join EPIC as we examine the mysteries of the world and beyond on epicvoyagers.com, and for updates on the upcoming interactive video presentations, the latest news and discussion on the EPIC forum, as well as research, investigations, and membership opportunities. Epic Voyages program schedule is on the Inception Radio Network. Thank you for joining us.
Howdy, this is Joe Mars. I'm inviting you to tune in to Epic Voyages, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern, Monday nights, right here on Inception Radio Network. To find out more about Epic and how you can become a member, visit epicvoyagers.com. That's epicvoyagers.com.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Welcome back, everybody out there in listener land from Inception Radio Network. I'm Laurel Tague, and we're pleased to have with us tonight Dr. Ardy Clarke, Professor Emeritus at Montana State University. She's talking to us about the content of her latest book, Sky People. She toured 4 Central American countries, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and Guatemala. It took her over 7 years, and she drove over 20,000 miles during that time, collecting firsthand accounts from local indigenous people of their direct one-on-one encounters with star people over their lifetime. So this is pretty much all. I wouldn't call it ancient history. I'd call it new history. Let me give out the information. If you're in the chat room, get ready to ask us some questions. And also, if you want to call in, our number is 888-919-2355. Ardy, in terms of the historical account of extraterrestrial visits and the most recent ones, do you want to say anything about the historical aspect before we talk about some of the examples from your book?
Well, you know, there are many stories in some of the villages that I came across, and stories that aren't necessarily published. I was in one of the side trips I took was I went to the state of Oaxaca, and I was visiting the ancient site of Monte Alban. It's a Zapotec site, not a Maya site. Mm-hmm. And I was standing there looking over on the edge of the city. It's on a mountainside and a mountaintop, and I was standing there looking out over the valley, and I could see these little fires all over, and that's where the people were doing their slash burning to make their little crops and things. And these 3 young men approached me, and they identified themselves as being university students, and they said that they were they were doing a documentary on the slash and burn agriculture and the damage that it was doing to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And wanted to know what my opinions were and if I would be in their film. And I said, oh, no, I'm not interested in being in your film. and of course, the driver, he started interfering, and he said, Dr. Clarke is here for a certain reason. Well, as soon as they found out I was from a university, they wanted to know if I could get them into America, and pretty soon the conversation just, I told them why I was there, and they said, well, maybe we should film you because what you're doing is much more interesting than what we're doing. And so I invited them to have Cokes, and we sat and talked, and they told me, they said, you might want to go to Lambieco, and so they began telling me about this village where centuries ago, this man came down on a beam of light, and he stood on this rock, and he surveyed the village, and then he set about building this ancient site, and he took a local woman for a wife, and that when the city was built and his son was old enough and married, he went back and stood on this rock and went back on a beam of light to the sky and was never seen again.
Wow.
And they said, this is a story that is told, and, you might want to check it out. And so throughout my travels, I would hear different ancient stories about the sky gods coming down, or, someone coming and helping the people. So it was not uncommon for me to hear these stories, but they were not regarded by the Maya people as ancient astronauts. In fact, when I would ask them these questions, they would smile and they say, well, the ancient astronauts are us. We're the ones who came here, and we stayed. We liked what we saw, and we stayed. There is no such thing as an ancient astronaut. And when I would ask them about it, I'd say, well, have you ever heard of Von Daniken? Well, no, unless it was somebody who was well-educated. They had not heard of Von Daniken. Mm-hmm. But when I explained to them the ancient astronaut theory, they said, well, he didn't ask us. Or we would have told him what is true and not true. And I think that's the difference, as I say again, between etic and emic research. An etic researcher goes in and looks at the artifacts and different things about an ancient civilization, and based upon his own knowledge and his own personal opinions and his ethnocentric views, decides that here are these people who live in the jungle who are basically not civilized and have no basic, has made no basic progress over the last 500 years, still living the way they used to do. They couldn't possibly have built these cities. Mm-hmm. And they're uneducated and they don't know anything, so therefore somebody else had to come here and build them. And I think, when you go there, somebody else didn't come there and build them. It was built by the people who there. They brought their knowledge with them. They built them. A catastrophic event occurred, and they abandoned their cities. And like I said, one day it may happen to us, and people will look upon us in a different way. But that is what the Maya say. He didn't ask us.
Well, and after reading your book, and you have over 100 accounts in there, or somewhere around 100, maybe it's not over 100, but it's close to that, they were very consistent in this opinion that you're expressing right now. They know exactly where they're from.
So, there are many ancient stories that were told to me, that of sky gods. But they differentiate between the sky gods and themselves, and I suppose it's just like the angels in the Bible, who spoke to the people. I've been reading recently the story of the Yurok, the reminiscence of a Yurok woman. And in that book, she talks about that when the Yurok people arrived in what is today California, that there were these white giants that lived here.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that the white giants taught them many things, and they taught the white giants many things. And then eventually they started intermarrying. And the day came when the white giants said that we have to go back to where we came from. Mm-hmm. We have to go back to the north, is what she said. And she said that what they did is the ones who looked most like them, they took with them. And the ones that didn't look as much like them, they left behind. And she said that is why today, she says, we have fair-skinned Yurok people among us because of the people in our past, who came from the north. Now, coming from the north could be coming from the sky as well.
Right.
You're not so sure of what she's talking about. But that is a traditional, historical belief that is passed on from generation to generation. And she wanted to make sure that she wrote this information down so nobody would ever forget where they came from. Interesting.
And when you say that they looked most like them, are you talking more about their height then, as well as
their color? I assume,
right.
She said they were fair-skinned, and so I'm assuming. And she called them white people. So she said, and then when these new white people came, and she's talking about the people who moved west, we knew they weren't the same because they gave alcohol to our people, and they tried to do all kinds of things to our women. So she said they weren't like the people. But she said the original ones in her book. She says the original ones were giants, white giants. She said.
Well, there's quite a bit of, and of course, I think, I'm not sure what the current status is on where the remains are, but there's a lot of accounts of, I want to say it's Santa Catalina Island off of California, and several of the explorers, I want to say the Portuguese, who came around in the 1500s or 1600s over around Southern California and Baja, reported like 8-foot, 9-foot people, men and women. They're on the beach, and there are written accounts, eyewitness accounts.
I'm trying to think of what tribe it is, but it was a tribe in California that I've read about that encountered red-haired giants, and who battled with them and finally cornered them in a cave and destroyed them. They burned them up, as I understand. So there are a lot of accounts of giants. I even ran across it when in Guatemala. My guide was telling me, and my driver, he was saying that in these mountains live these giants, and their pets are white tigers, and they roam these jungles, and people don't go out into the jungle at night because if they do, they might never come home.
Interesting.
And when I said to him, I said, well, are you sure that, he said, you can even find their bones. He said, and I said, well, are you sure they're not mastodon bones? Because I was talking to an archaeologist who said that mastodons had roamed that part of he said, oh no. He said, they will bite off your heads, and he said, and spit it out like watermelon seeds. And I just had to laugh because he was so graphic in his description of what you would see, what these giants were capable of doing.
I think that I viewed, I want to say, a fellow who does a lot of work with the Hopi about 2 years ago now, I think Gary David, and I asked him about some of this, and also talking with Aaron Judkins, who is one of our guest hosts from time to time. I believe the term, and it might be a Cherokee term, Sitka, and they were tall, like 8-9 feet. I don't know about the fair skin, but their bone structure of their skulls was not typical with Native American ethnic bone structure. And the hair that was left on many of the mummified bodies that they found, this would have been in Lovelock Cave, which I think is in Utah or Colorado, but I'm not sure. But the hair was often red that was left on the heads. And they herded them, and the local tribe has you could call it a legend or you can call it a historical account, that they got sick and tired of them chasing down their women and chasing down smaller people and picking their buffalo up under one of them under each arm and running back somewhere and killing them and eating them. And they forced them into a no outlet type of a situation, pushed them into a cave and started a fire, and that's where the remains are. And I believe it's called Lovelock Cave. But does that ring a bell to you, Ardy?
No, it doesn't. And of course, I haven't heard of that. But the one I had read about, the red-haired giants, was in California. Well, in Superstition Mountain in Arizona, that's the home. The Apaches have a story that they tell about the little people who live there. And the Hopi had stolen, according to them, there was a pale white woman who protected these little people. And the little people grew crops and were very, very good at what they did. And they left everybody alone. They weren't warlike at all. And the Hopi claimed that the pale woman was theirs, according to the Apache story, and that they received word. The little people received word that the Hopis were coming for them, and not the Hopis, the Zunis. I'm sorry, the Zunis were coming for them, and so the Apaches were on one hillside. They said, watching what was happening, and the pale woman threw fire, and explosions occurred, and over half of the warriors were killed, and the rest of them went in retreat. And that this woman remained there, and they talked about how ethereal she looked and heavenly she looked, and they say that some people say that she went back to the sky and took the little people with her. Other people say that she went inside the Superstition Mountain, and so there's many stories about Superstition Mountain and alien-like creatures or spiritual-like creatures with little people, which I find very fascinating too.
And I think the same kind of, not the same stories, but similar stories are connected with Mount Shasta in Northern California too.
That could be, because I haven't read a lot of those. I've spent a lot more time in the Southwest than I have some of the other, in Northern. I haven't spent a lot of time in Northern California.
Well, you're pretty close to it up there in Montana.
I
know. We got a couple of questions here. Let me put these to you quickly, and then I want you to give the listeners some examples of these remarkable accounts that you heard of abductions and pregnancies and all kinds of things. But let me get these two questions to you real quickly. Do you know of any of the Native people that you met with who say that they can summon these elders to appear at will?
Well, some of the elders that I met, the Maya, claim that they can travel the Star Road to visit with the ancestors. They say that the ancestors, when they begin their ceremonies, they do a prayer and a chant in their native language, and they tell me the reason for that is that's the language that the star people, the ancestors, speak, and that they can put themselves in a situation where they can travel that star highway to get messages and to visit with them. And so, as far as calling them to Earth, I didn't hear that. I've heard of them traveling to meet them.
And are those the shamans? Is that what you said?
Yeah, and they really don't call themselves shaman. They call themselves priests or healers or It's just like here we call the people the medicine. You hear it commonly called the medicine man or the shaman, but they really don't call themselves that. They're more of the we call them holy men.
It's not really about magic, but for someone who goes into that role in a group, they have to be selected by the current person in that role, and it involves many decades of training. And it's not an easy role to play, so it's not at all about magic. You're right, and I think when we hear the word shaman, people think, oh, he was like a magician or shapeshifter or something. But it's really like you said, a holy man. It's like a Dalai Lama of sorts within that culture. So, okay, and then this other question, and then I want you to talk to us about some of these absolutely amazing firsthand accounts that you've written about in your book. By the way, the name of the book is Sky People, and I know for a fact that you'll find it at Barnes & Noble. I know it's on Amazon.com. And if you want to check out Ardy's website, it's www.SIXKILLER, SIXKILLER.com, where she also has some information about her other books. So here's this question from the chat room. Have you ever looked into any of the giant skeletons or reports of giant skeletons across the U.S.? And does that relate at all to some of what we've been talking about this last few minutes? It's not like you haven't been real busy in the last 10 years.
I haven't looked into that. I haven't looked into that at all. Mm-hmm. But I do have an interesting story about a skeleton that was found in a mountain cave in Honduras. I met this elder. He was almost 100 years old. Mm. And he told me that at one time when he was a boy, he had worked. Well, he worked at the site, at the site there in Copan for most of his life. And he told me that he had, when he was a boy, he said that very few visitors ever came there. It was mostly archaeologists. And he said that he worked at the site for nearly 75 years. And he said Spindon was the first to hire me. Now, Spindon was, he was Herbert Spindon. He was a assistant curator of anthropology at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. And he was in Copan from 1909 to 1929. And when he was a boy, he said that Spindon hired him and gave him 10 cents a day in U.S. dollars. And he said that he would run errands for Spindon. He would go get them water, and he would bring food to them, and he would help them lift rocks and different kinds of things. And he said, but Spindon told him, he said, if you will learn English, I'll give you more money. And he said, by the time he was 8, he said, I spoke English. I learned very fast. And he said, then he paid me 25 cents a day until he left. And he said then he worked with some Carnegie scientists who came to excavate and restore the city, and they paid him 50 cents a day because he could speak English. They were so surprised to find somebody there that could speak English. And he said, I said, well, you're kind of the resident historian here, he said. And he says, well, he said, I worked at the site helping the archaeologists who came here to excavate and restore the city. And he said it was a very exciting time. Mm-hmm. But he said that those were good days, he said. And he said, when I was one of the things I would do on the weekend, he said, is I had some friends and we would go out into the mountains, into the caves, and we would look for artifacts, because if we found artifacts, the archaeologists would pay us for them. And he said it was on one of those excursions that he found the Silver Man from the stars.
Oh, my.
And I said, well, can you tell me what you mean? And he said, well, we found a skeleton of a man in a silver suit. And he said his suit was silver from the top of his head to the bottom of his feet. But he said all that remained inside the suit was a skeleton. And he said from the size of the suit, he was a small man. He said smaller than me. And this elder probably stood about, I don't know, maybe 4'6", 4'8". And he said that it was no more than a meter tall. And he said his head was covered with a hard metal-like tube. He said, we found a strange tablet with strange characters lying beside him. And he said it was not Mayan. We knew Mayan writing from the stela. He said, so this writing was foreign to us. And it was unknown to the archaeologists, too. He said, so we took our treasure, he said, back to the archaeologists, hoping for a reward. And I said, well, can you tell me more about the helmet he was wearing? And he said, well, the best I can describe it, he said it was like a large can. That was the shape. It was attached to a suit that had a hose that attached to the front of the suit. And he said there were different colored buttons on the front of the breast of the suit. And I said, well, what happened when the archaeologists saw your discovery? And he said, they were very excited. He said they took it into one of their tents and they began examining it. And he said, I heard one of them say, we got to get this back to the U.S. And he said, ever since I gave that to those archaeologists, he said, I've regretted it. He said, I think it was proof about our connection with the stars. And he said, that's why I call him the Silver Man from the Stars. And he said, I said, well, what did they do with it? And he said, well, the next day, he said, I saw a box in the tent, and I think they packaged him up and shipped him to their university. He said, I never saw him again. But all my life, I've wondered about the Silver Man. And he said, I'm sure the scientists in the U.S. have studied and restudied him, but they've kept it a secret.
I think they probably just went straight to the basement and hid it. Carnegie Mellon is one of the universities, along with the Smithsonian Institute, who have a long history of coming in and doing digs, and some of the more interesting non-traditional artifacts that they find never see the light of day again, and they can't verify that they took them or anything. So,
well, I asked him. I said, up in the mountains where you live, I said, were there stories about space aliens? And he said, the wise men told us stories about a small race of men who visited the earth, and sometimes they lived in the mountains for weeks at a time. He said they bothered no one, and so the people left them alone. And he said, but you could see them at times, but most of the time they avoided people. And he said they came in silver discs that spit fire, and they wore silver suits. And he said, I think what I discovered was one who died on one of those visits, and they buried him in the cave. And we disturbed his gravesite, and he said, I'll be haunted by that as long as I live.
Goodness. And just for our listeners, I'm going to point out that if you buy Ardy's book on page 79, chapter 9, The Silver Man from the Stars, right there is this account, and you can read it for yourself. Your book is just, it's just the most, I'm going to have to read it a second time because I want to try and really remember some of these images. They're so intense, the stories that they told you. You had some of the young girls and some middle-aged women tell you that they know that they were abducted, and they know they were pregnant, and they know that the baby was taken away before they had it. Is that right?
Yes, I met this young couple who told me about an event that happened to them when they were sweethearts, and they had gone to the village at night. A lot of people gather in the palazzo or in the central area of the village, and they often play music and dance, and that's still common throughout that part of the country. And she told me that as they were coming back, they witnessed this bright light overhead, and how she was. They were both taken on board, and despite and they went on a beam of light, she said, and despite how they kicked and struggled, they were still taken on board. And she said that a few weeks later, she discovered she was pregnant, but she said, I was a virgin. And I had never had sex with anyone. And so she said that she told, her fiance, I'm pregnant. They decided that it must be a virgin birth, like Mother Mary. And so he decided that they should get married, and he would claim that the baby was his. And then she said 2 months later she wasn't pregnant anymore. And I said, well, was there any event that occurred at that time that would have made you lose the baby? She said, no, a spacecraft came back. And she said, then I wasn't pregnant anymore. But I thought it was a really an interesting story, because in their view, of life, there was no other explanation of why she was pregnant, that it must be a virgin birth. Because she had never had sex with anyone.
Wow. Wow. That's difficult to make up from that age and that perspective. Did any of the people that actually spoke about perhaps being impregnated, did they ever see these children?
No.
Or did they never did?
No, none of them ever. And, and I had several of them tell me about such situations. They were all haunted by the experience. They all wondered if what happened. Did they lose the baby? Did the aliens take the baby? And what were they going to do with the baby? But none of them ever reported seeing the baby.
Wow.
Unlike some of the stories that, you'll read today about, about alien abduction of women.
And, if you were in New Jersey or Pennsylvania, someone would say, oh, you need to go to a therapist and work on that. But these folks down there, they are never going to go to a therapist and work on that. So what do they do with that experience?
And I think that they have such a strong support group, among the women. The women don't question it. Their neighbors and their relatives, they tell them that, it's all right and it's God's will, and there must have been a reason for it, and so that seems to this one woman told me that she was on her way to town to sell eggs at the market, and she said on her way back it was getting dark, and she saw this ball of light streak across the sky, and she said it frightened her, and she began to run, and she said there was a light that pulled me on board a craft, and she said I could see my village, and I could see my house and my garden, and I knew my husband. First he would be worried, and then he would get angry, she said. And she said that I told them I had to go because I had to get home. And she said they took my blood, and they took samples of my skin, and they opened my legs. And then she was apparently embarrassed by the whole ordeal, and then she felt life inside her after that, she said. And she said, but 2 months later, her belly was empty. She was sure she was pregnant, but then 2 months later, her belly was empty.
And did that coincide with another visit?
Yes. And I had women who described crafts as being like an oil tanker or a gas tank, and that would be akin to, the long cigar-shaped, and, who saw them land, and be taken on board, but not really have any recollection of anything other than knowing they were taken forcibly, on board these strange craft.
Did they report that they thought they were gone for like 2 minutes, but it turned out it was a whole day? Did anyone say anything about that?
I'm sorry, you went out and I couldn't hear what the question was.
Did they report anything that you could understand as missing time, that they thought they were only?
that was something that, particularly this woman, she was so worried that her husband was going to be angry, that he was going to get so angry with her because she was late, and she shouldn't have been there. He would accuse her of being in town and doing something she wasn't supposed to be doing.
Interesting. I was going to ask you if you heard more than one type of craft described. So you heard of something that looks like a long, thin can. You mentioned already one that sounded like a saucer.
Right, and then one that was like a wheel.
Okay.
And that's the one I saw when I was in Copan, was one that was like a wheel, which was later seen by several people over the hotel where I was staying in Guatemala. It was a small, not really a hotel, it's more of a bread and breakfast. It only had 4 suites in the hotel, and it actually was owned by my driver's brother. And that night, after I had been up all night in Honduras, I had gone to bed early, but that night, that craft that I saw was over that hotel.
I'm sorry we didn't get back to your story, and I meant to, but I'm glad you remembered and you brought that up. You left us you were sitting with this woman's brother, and you saw all of these lights down in the courtyard, and he turned to you and said, "You're one of us." And
right.
What you're saying now is that the next night, although you went to bed early, the same craft that you saw that night before, the people in town saw.
Right, and it at least the same description. When I got in the vehicle, the driver said something to me about, "Did you see the UFO last night?" And I had seen it, but I just didn't respond to him because I was so engulfed into what had just happened to me and thinking about everything that happened that in those early morning hours. And I was late getting back to the hotel from the site, and I had to get everything thrown together and get, the driver was waiting there. And when I got into the vehicle, Teodoro, who had accompanied me into Copan, said, he's standing out there yelling, "You're one of us. You must come back." And the driver is saying to me, "Did you see the UFO last night?" And he said, "We saw it in Guatemala," and they said that it headed toward Copan when it left. And then that night, I'm just dead to the world because I've been up for 24 hours, and I go to bed, and the next morning, the guide tells me about this event, that this spacecraft came back, and it was like a wheel. And that's the best way I can describe it. It was like a huge wheel. And just circling, and just disappeared all of a sudden. And I was just so amazed because one of the young waiters in this hotel where I was staying said that he was taken on board and this craft, and that he was and the preacher said it was, he called it, he said it was a Jesus miracle, and went through all the descriptions of what a Jesus miracle was. So, as again, I say, a lot of times I would encounter interpretations of what people had seen as either being from the devil or being from Jesus.
Wow. Did you, in addition to different kinds of craft, what different kinds of, I guess, I hate to call it an ET, what kinds of other star people did people describe besides the
interesting things? And one thing that was very consistent, and I think I put a couple of the stories in the book, is about entities that have the ability to become a part of the landscape. For example, I was told on several occasions about when I was in Belize, the young man who ran the hotel there where I was staying told me he had a story to tell me, and if I had time, he would like to tell me. And I said, "Well, how do you know that I'm collecting stories?" And he said, "Well, because we have this thing here. The bellboy heard you talking to your driver about something, and he told his wife, and his wife told my wife, and so the story had already spread around the hotel what I was doing there. And so he told me he had his own UFO story, and if I had time, he'd like to tell me." Mm-hmm. Well, he told me about that when he was a young man. They were about 17, 18 years old, his cousins and brother, and they had this place in the jungle, and it was an ancient city not far from where they lived, and it had never been excavated, and it was just mounds of dirt over temples and trees, and he said that they would go there, and when they were kids they would go there and explore. Well, when they became young men, they would go there and get drunk. And he was telling me about this one time that they went into the jungle to drink, and he said that they didn't drink in front of their mothers because their mothers would beat them up, and their grandmothers would join in, and he said, so we had to sneak off to drink. And he said, so we would go into this city, and we would stay there overnight. And he said, we go there, and we see this craft that is landed there. And they think originally that it's an American military craft. They don't think that it's a spacecraft. But one of the things that they thought was really interesting was that when the men moved around, the beings moved around, whatever they stood in front of, that their uniforms changed. If they were standing in front of the craft, their uniforms were silver. If they were standing in front of the in front of the pyramid, their uniforms became gray. If they were standing in front of the jungle, their uniforms became green. And they said they just kind of faded into whatever environment they were in. Wow. And I found that really interesting because I found there was another young man that told me a story about the same thing, of how the ability that they had. And the young man in Belize said, we decided that the Americans had this technology. They were definitely the military. They were American military. He said, because we're always hearing stories of the American military coming down to Belize and doing all these things in the jungle. And he said the government would deny it, but people would swear that the American military was down here doing things. And he said, but then when they walked through the wall of this pyramid,
oh my,
we knew they weren't Americans.
Wow.
And then he proceeds to tell me about how concerned they were because underneath this pyramid was a tunnel. And in that tunnel were all these artifacts. Some of them they had taken in there themselves and stored so looters wouldn't take them. And he said one of his cousins just felt that tunnel belonged to them, and that stuff belonged to them, and these entities were going into this place, and they were going to steal them. And so they ran to this entrance to this tunnel to go in there to see what was going on. Well, by the time they got near it, the entities came out of the tunnel, and he said that that's when they saw him. And he said that they just disappeared again into their craft, and they left. And you know, that's not the first time I've heard of the ability for them just to vanish right in front of your eyes. I mean, I was told that by American Indians, and I heard that throughout Mesoamerica.
I don't want to get too far off topic. We've only got about 15 minutes left, but you've brought up your other book, The Encounters, where I think you were talking with the Native Americans in North America. What did Sasquatch or the Big People or anything like that come out in their stories?
Well, I didn't ask about those kind of things. I know there's a whole history of American Indian encounters with Sasquatch and Bigfoot, but I really don't have I'm interested in the star people. And so I really wasn't interested in that aspect of knowledge, and so I didn't pursue that. When I was in Mexico, or not in Mexico, but in Guatemala, this Mayan elder told me about that there were different kinds of creatures that roamed the jungle, and one of them was the hairy man that was similar to our Bigfoot. And then there was another one that roamed the highlands, and that he felt they were from the stars. And he said that they have terrible reputations of stealing women. And he said, so we keep our women and children. He says, nobody will go into the jungle at night. And he says, then there's another group that comes from the stars, and it's almost like they're related to those who are living in the forest. And he says, because when they come, the giants cry.
Oh.
And we can hear them. It's almost like they're chasing them and rounding them up. And he says that they're very frightened when that occurs, and he thinks that these creatures that live, these giants that live, but he says they're not the hairy ones. And he related the hairy ones as being like Bigfoot. And he was aware of Bigfoot because he had lived in America and had, but he says that it was, for him it was so very alone, he says. And he told me how he feared being caught, and how he left the U.S. and went back home and never left again, he said, because, he said that when you're an illegal in America, you're scared all the time.
I can imagine.
He said you live in fear. And he said, I decided it was no life for me. So, and I ran across that all the time, people who were, many of the people who spoke English that I talked to had been here for, one person I talked to had been here for 5 years, but he said that he lived in fear the whole time he was here.
Well, I can imagine that.
And a lot of them talked about, it was before the day when you had to have passports to go back and forth between Mexico and the U.S., and also at a time where you didn't have to show your identity to get on an airplane. You just had a name, and you just got on a plane, and you went wherever. And they said, this one man told me, he was a driver for me, or not a driver, but a guide for me, and he told me that he spent 3 years up in Oregon and Washington and California, and he would go with the seasons, picking different kinds of crops. And he said that when he saved up enough money for an airline ticket, he said he just got on a plane and headed home because living in fear was no fun.
No,
I thought it's interesting to hear that perspective, that the people who are illegal in this country and who know that, have a lot of fear of
the reason that I asked about the the Sasquatch or Bigfoot, or I think I've seen them called the elder ones or the old ones or something like that. Well, I had a guest here a few months ago named June O'Brien, who has written a couple of books. She's up in the Northwest, and she's written a couple of books called the Blue Child series, and she's talking about a lot of the same things you're talking about the ancestry going to the star people. In her books, I think they came from the Pleiades, and the old ones, or the Sasquatch, go right through into rock, like you're describing some of the accounts in your book. So there's quite a correlation with some of the things that she's describing in her books and what you're talking about too. I don't know if you've heard.
And many of one of the elders told me, there's over 600 civilizations that are visiting Earth, or 600 civilizations that exist in this solar system. But that, and who knows, he said, how many exist outside the solar system. And he said they range in sophistication from being in the Stone Age to are being only like light, that they are their thought processes are extremely telepathy. They have the ability to change into any form they want to change. They, and that they have the ability to travel through space just by thinking of a place they want to be, and they're there. Just a lot of different sophistication around the universe, according to him.
Wow. Ardy, we've only got like 6 minutes left before we have to start really seriously closing the show down, and the time has just ripped by for me. And I wanted to ask you something, since we were talking, your other book, Encounters, you were speaking with North American indigenous people. Did you do any of that in the areas around Grand Canyon, and did you hear any interesting stories for them about that area?
Well, I spent a lot of time down in the Southwest. And of course, a lot of the stories in Encounters with Star People come from the Southwest. But one of the most interesting stories I heard down there was a story told to me by a young man. He said that his grandfather and his friends buried a spaceman.
Oh.
And this was about the time of when the Roswell crash occurred, or perhaps the Aztec crash in that time period. And he said that they found this man roaming in the desert. They had been out, and that they took him to safety. They took him into a cave and to try to help him, and that when it was obvious that they weren't going to be of any help, that they stayed with him until he died, and they buried him. And he said that they did not want to turn him over to the authorities. They respected his life and understood that he came from the stars, and that and I just recently got a story from a man down in that part of the Four Corners area. His mother was Navajo. His father was a teacher, a white teacher from back east, and he grew up on the reservation and struggled quite a bit with being a half-breed, he said, and so as soon as he was old enough, he went to Vietnam, and he when his father was killed in a car wreck, and his mother gave him his father's life insurance, and he opened like a little repair shop. And he told me that that he and his wife would go out into the desert, and they would camp on the weekends. And he said that after she died, he continued to do that. He said it was kind of his way of connecting with her. And he said on this one particular weekend, he was supposed to go to Four Corners for a veteran ceremony. And he went out and camped with his dog. And the next morning, that night, he said, this spacecraft came over. He's lying on his back looking at the stars, and suddenly the sky is black. And a craft so large that it blocked out the entire sky except for the stars along the edges came over where he was. He saw some balls of light come out, like he thought they were crafts. The next morning, he's packing up to go to Four Corners for the ceremony, and he sees a spacecraft, a smaller spacecraft, landed in the valley below where he's driving, and he stops, and he said that he watched as they were going into a mine, and there were two different sizes of people, small ones going in and bringing out samples, and they would check them and go over them, and then they would take some with them and they would leave others. And then he went to another place and found another craft that was drilling and taking samples out of the ground, and he's very concerned about this. He thinks that they are looking for resources on our planet, and that if we have something they want, that they may at some point try to take it from us. And so here he is. He's formed this little army of his own that's watching the skies, and has a lot of warnings for me, because he said that, you have to be very careful when you write this stuff, because, you are probably, he said, you're telling the truth. And that's something that's not always been done. And he says, I don't know if the government will look favorably upon that. And he said, so just beware, and, no, I'm only a phone call away, and my guys will be there for you. So
oh, my goodness.
It was really an interesting encounter.
Oh, yeah. Ardy, I hate to tell you.
You'll have to read my next book to get the full story on that one, because this just happened to me this summer.
Well, I'm definitely going to be watching your website, and I'm hoping everyone else out here, too, will be. It's SIXKILLER.com. And
they can write me, if anybody has any questions, and if they read my book and they want to talk about anything, I don't have a staff, so but I read every email and I respond to every email, and so you can be guaranteed you'll be getting a response from me, not somebody else.
Wonderful.
But Ardy at SIXKILLER.com.
And the link is right there on your website, too. You just go to the website and click on Contact Me.
Yeah, and, I'm happy to hear from anyone who has interest about what I'm writing about.
Well, I'm definitely going to contact you again and see if we can't get you back to talk about the other book, Encounters, and I'm going to keep in touch with you on this other one that you're starting to work on. I hate to do this, but we have absolutely nothing, not a time left.
Okay.
So I'm going to have to say thank you so very much, Dr. Ardy Clarke, for being with us tonight. Everybody check out Amazon.com and Barnes & Noble and look for the book, and go to her website, SIXKILLER.com, and check her publisher's link there. And we'll be back next week. Let me see who's here next week. Kevin Cook will be here for Epic Voyagers, talking with Heidi, the Outlander, I think is that what she calls herself? So everybody stick with us next week. It was a great show tonight. Thanks for the questions. And thank you, Joe Champion, for your hard work behind the scenes. And everybody have a wonderful week. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for being with us tonight. Please join us again next Monday evening for Extraordinary Phenomena Investigations Council's Epic Voyages. I'm Roger Peacock for Epic. Until next time.